Manfred. How are you doing today?
Hello, Rahul. I'm doing very well, very well.
I think I would like to start today's conversation by focusing on the next set of keys for effective leadership, and would want to start by understanding how you would define them, and then would love to hear about some of the interesting stories that have been part of either your experience or your working with your clients to understand
Mhm.
them better and how to apply them in my own life in helping others. How do they can think about applying in their own professional life for better success. So to start with, today we will the first talk about mastery of conflict management skills. And My first question to you is, when you define conflict management and conflict management skills, what is your definition?
Well, I'm not so sure there is one clear definition because conflict is, of course, a very broad term. But in essence, it is when you and I have a disagreement and we need to find out how can we settle on either a compromise or a consensus or sometimes to agree to disagree in a professional way. You can't always get on the same page. Sometimes it just doesn't work because my beliefs or my thoughts are completely different than yours. And that's one of the key elements. If you think about our own beliefs, really become our reality, our truth. And when we look at that for a moment, our beliefs, what we believe or don't believe, becomes our reality. And that is our basis from which we then determine and judge and act on our disagreements um, or agreements with other people. And so when we look at conflict, I think the first thing that we need to consider is again a look into the mirror. What are my beliefs about this situation? What do I see as my reality, and how does that relate to the other person's reality? You know, and I know I get always some challenges on that, but if you think for a moment, what is truth? Most people consider truth as this absolute term. For me, truth is relative, and of course I can hear already the uproar. How can be truth relative? Well, it's very simple. I'll give you an example. Is this glass half full or half empty? It can't be both because it's the opposite. One is the opposite of the other. So what is it? Well, it depends on your perspective. If you think it is half full, that's what it's going to be. If I think it's half empty, that's what it's going to be. It's still the same glass and the same amount of liquid in it. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yes.
And when we think about this and think about a conflict, a disagreement, we need to understand our own position and how relevant is it in this context of the disagreement. And then ideally, we need to look at the other person's or group's perspective and position and what makes them believe what they believe. And then we can start having a conversation and recognizing. And to me, conflict management is not very, very difficult. It is a question of relating to other people and getting to understand where they are coming from. And the moment we we move away from our position and maybe make a step outside and look at the whole situation, then we can start asking better questions.
What is the skill that we are talking about here, Manfred? I think I'm understanding the concept better. When you define it this way, I surely get the fact that conflicts arise because of difference in perspective. There is no hard absolute truth. And whenever there is a conflict, it means that there are different beliefs about a particular situation. The example that you commonly known example, glass half empty or half full. Uh, I'm looking at it from the lens of it being half full. You are looking at it from the lens of it being half empty, and that's how we are defining the situation. And in that situation, the solution which is required is to understand that it's the difference in perspective. How do I understand the other person's perspective, and then make them understand my perspective so that we can arrive at a common ground. I think this part is clear.
So,
What what is the skill here? If someone were to think about practicing, which are the one or two habits or skills that one has to hone?
look, most conflicts are really taking place in the middle of an issue, not at the beginning of an issue and not at the end of an issue. And what do I mean by that? It's not the starting point. That's when we start talking and finding out that we have a conflict. But then we get stuck in the middle. And when you approach this in a different way, when you get stuck, when you then are willing to inquire and find out, okay, what is it really that you would like as the outcome? And if we then can look at the outcome, often people want the same outcome or a very similar outcome. They are not in agreement how to get there. But if we can get then agreement on the outcome, then we can kind of re-engineer back and say, okay, where is it falling apart? Where can we then find potentially a consensus? Hopefully, that would be the ideal situation, or at least a workable compromise that gets you as close as possible to that outcome and gives me as well as much where I can say, okay, this will work for me.
So, in other words, is the first skill the ability to uh, visualize a target outcome.
Yes.
In other words, I'm also thinking of one of the most common skills which is so relevant today, and I see it almost always in the work that I also do, is not actually problem solving but problem finding. In today's age, almost everyone has access to infinite amount of data. So it's not always about I'm lack of ideas, I don't have information. It's always about what is the problem that we are dealing with here. And once I have clarity about what is the problem that I want to solve in any situation, like you were saying, that's not in the beginning, it's probably in the middle, that with so much of information, I've seen it live as well. One actually loses track of what is the most relevant problem to focus on before you get into problem solving mode. So
Yes.
similarly, the situation that you're talking about here is that we started doing a discussion. We are in the middle of that discussion, and there's no clarity on what is the common outcome that we are now aiming for, because of which the conflict arises in the first place.
Yes. And I'll give you an example. I had a I had a client. She was the legal counsel, internal. It's in a larger corporation, but in one of the divisions, she was the legal counsel and was tasked to deal with all the different contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And her counterpart that she often had conflicts with was the head of, I think it was called sales, or was it distribution? In any case, an operational function that was focusing on fulfillment and customer satisfaction and so on. So they constantly had kind of a battle, and she was very distraught about it. She said, I have a task. I need to make sure that the contracts that our salespeople and our fulfillment people are putting forward to our customers, that they are sound and they are not putting us into any issues, and still serve the purpose of creating the right outcome for our customers as well. And so I suggest to her, why don't you find out what this guy really, what's his main issue with you on these contracts, not with you as a person, but with you on these contracts. And after some back and forth between them, it turned out there were two issues that they didn't even discuss in their consistent quarrel. One was timing, to get quick response and get this established and settled quickly. And the second one was getting the people, the salespeople, involved in finding out some of the details of the customer requirements and customer needs, because they were not properly documented. So she was kind of stabbing a little bit in muddy waters to fix and create the right contractual setup, the right legal setup, and the salespeople really, they were not having a problem with the contract itself, with the legalese of the contract or anything, but they wanted a speedy feedback and so that they can respond fast without weeks of time. So it was really in the end a little bit of a capacity issue and a little bit of an information issue with heads up information, and this is what's coming, and some details. So they worked out the checklist, because most of these contracts were 90% was kind of the same, and then 10% was adjusted to a specific product, service, customer needs. And once they had that figured out, all of a sudden the conflict was in essence resolved, and they started to really collaborate very quick and very well and very efficient.
Superb.
But
I think that's a
it's just finding out what you really, what is really your problem.
right.
I mean, yeah, you're yelling at me, that's fine, but what is it?
Yes, a great example. And I think once the real issue has been identified, which goes back to what you were saying and the example that I gave, that once we know what is the outcome that we both want, or what is the real problem to solve for, then things become easier. In this example as well, thinking about the checklist or the solution itself would have been simpler, but arriving at this is the problem that needs to get solved was the hurdle. So I'm curious, in this example, how is there a specific tactic that she used to even arrive at this is the problem?
Good question. I think you may have heard that before, leading with questions.
Right. Yes.
No, it is not very complex. It's just putting yourself into somebody else's shoes as well and looking at the land from their perspective
Hmm.
and understanding where they're coming from. And then lead the process with the right questions to find a useful solution.
Awesome. I think this kind of also answers my core question in probably three parts in that case. When I was asking about what skill or habit one should practice or develop to become good at conflict management. So I think the first I would list it as problem finding, the skill of problem finding. Before you think about honing your problem solving skills, more important is problem finding, skill number one. How to become better at that? Skill number two is leading with questions or asking better questions, which is what you just mentioned. And I think in this example, I can also see that she was able to separate out the people from the problem. So, most often in conflict, since I am having a conflict with a person, or often it has happened with me, I've seen with clients that it becomes very difficult to separate out the problem from the person, specifically if I have a history with the person.
Absolutely, absolutely. Think about it for with them. It was interesting because her attitude and it's mindset. And let me come back to this for a moment. That's where it really starts. Her attitude was these salespeople just don't want to deal with the legal consequences. They would like to just give it away and get it done. You know, and the salespeople were considering, well, legal is always blocking us from doing business. So that was the starting mindset. And you know, our mindset is in essence a frame. And within this frame, thinking takes place. So whatever the mindset is, our thinking is limited to that frame. So by changing the mindset and opening up, becoming more what I would call open-minded and looking at other perspectives, not only my own, allows you to think different. And in managing conflicts and resolving conflicts, that is probably the most important thing. Recognizing your own mindset, opening that up, and then finding out and going about it with this wider horizon.
Understood. So it reminds me, by the way, these three skills, two in particular, they remind me of two books. So one, when you mention about leading with questions, it reminds me of the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, uh, who was an ex FBI agent, master of negotiation. And I think he mentions in a very articulate manner how he honed his negotiation skill in toughest of the situation by leading with questions.
Mhm.
In case anyone who has not read this book, I would highly recommend. It's a great book,
Oh,
enjoyable watch.
absolutely. That's a good one.
And the second one, which in this example, when you mentioned about separating out the people from the problem, I think I had mentioned about this book earlier also. But Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher. It's a great book. It has got multiple other nuggets as well. But one of the one that I had picked up was this separating out people from the problem. Hard one, A hard skill, I must say, for all of us. At the end of the day, we are humans, so we don't mechanically just look at the problem. Specifically, when there is a background, same set of people that we are working with, we create these prejudices that if I am doing a discussion with so and so person, the person is like this, and hence he or she is going to speak in a particular angle or in a particular way only. So that's the second one. And
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you think about, as long as it is legal against sales or sales against legal,
yeah,
we are person against person.
yes, yes,
But if you can manage to get sales and legal about contracts or the contract management
hmm,
and information provision and simplification, all of a sudden you can find solutions.
totally agree. So I'm curious, Manfred. I think we covered how you define conflict management. We covered uh, three of the skills or habits. I'm sure there are more for anyone to become better at conflict management, but we covered three of them: problem finding, leading with questions, and separating out people from the problem. These are just example skills that one could look at, become better at, build habits around. So now my third part is,
May I say something here?
so,
I don't want to oversimplify this
of
here,
course,
okay?
of course.
This, but there are some basic concepts that one needs to consider and maybe internalize to get on the right path.
Yeah,
Obviously, situations are different and it becomes more complex and there are more complex issues. The example that I brought was not a very complex issue, but it was a very practical issue which
mm,
happens every day in every organization.
mm,
And the good old 80-20 rule, 80% of those conflicts that happen every day are actually quite simple.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe 20% are far more complex and sophisticated and require uh, well, additional tricks of the trade to really deal with it effectively. But hey, if you can solve 80% of day-to-day conflict activities, I think everyone is at least 3 steps further.
yeah, yeah. Which, by the way, so on those 20% is where I was about to ask my next question. So, which is where you need to sharpen your skills, improve, and which is also where perhaps a coach could play a role. So, my next question was more about in this example of yours, which you gave. Uh, what role did you play, or how do you go about in helping leaders become better at conflict management?
Well, we talk about what is. If I would work this with you, I would first ask you about your perspective in this conflict. And then I will challenge you, Raul. What if I sit in your shoes and you sit in the other person's shoes with whom you have the conflict? What would you tell me? What would be
Mm,
your perspective from that side?
mm.
And that creates some rethinking. And you can do this yourself.
We
You know,
can't. I think it's very, it's probably
that's what I
theoretically.
encourage going
Yeah,
forward.
yeah.
Always put yourself for a moment into the other side's chair and look at it at the table from that side.
Mm,
And then look at where can you find maybe commonalities that you can use to build a foundation from which you can then tackle what you don't have in common.
mm. Got it. So, and is this something, um, um, uh, the example that you gave here, is this something the core of what you do in such a situation when you're helping someone to become better at conflict management, or this is the starting point where what you're doing is helping the person get started by looking at things from the other person's perspective? But over a series of sessions, is there certain habits that you help the person build up?
Well, yes, and one of the habits that work for many things, but certainly also for conflict management and conflict resolution, is invest some time every day, and if it's only 10 or 15 minutes, to think about your thinking. Step outside yourself, and that may sound a little bit esoteric, but
Mm.
step outside yourself and look at how you're thinking. Because in that, there is a lot of interesting findings that you can make that will help you to find the next step, to find the next. By the end of the day, my clients also learn over time what I call self-coaching, so that they can take that step aside and look at the situation and say, okay, and I'm having fun with that. I challenge them to think about, okay, what would Manfred ask now? How would Manfred challenge me?
I love that.
And when you work with somebody a while,
Mm.
then they start recognizing a certain pattern or a certain approach that in essence I figured out to work with them. Every client is different, so one of my tasks is to figure out the nuances and then challenge my client in a way that helps my client to further develop and develop his self-coaching skill as well.
I love it. I think that in itself, if it's a goal that how do I reach a stage with Manfred, that how do I become better at self coaching, it itself is worthy of spending time with you to learn new habits and then reach that stage.
Yeah, that's basically yeah, that's basically the outcome. Yeah.